So I'm going to go with KMFDM, My Life with the Thrill Kill Kult, Ministry, obviously, 9 Inch Nails, and for number 5, we're going to put in Front 242, although you could go Frontline Assembly, you could go not really Filter, Stabbing Westward, just something of Gravity Kills, just something to fill the airwaves. But let's go with guys that are originators and have a good catalog throughout the 90s, more than some of these other guys. Could put Manson in for balls, because we're talking about more, not commercially successful, but more of commercially influential bands here. And with 9 Inch Nails here, I think they started to get really popular with people in my generation, born in 81, born in the early 80s, possibly some late 70s people. Maybe our first exposure was to them through the Woodstock and when Closer, that summer of '94. I know that's when people my age, I know, started noticing it. And it's funny, Ministry had already been out. My first exposure was the MTV's Jesus Built the Hot Rod, the NWO song. They had a couple really heavy ones, and I guess we just mistake it as metal at the time, and it was maybe around when Trent was getting popular. I remember seeing that performance of the Woodstock. And it was good, and it made me want to go back to his other albums and, go check out the BMG catalogs and get that. But, I did the same thing with Ministry as well. I had the album with, NWO, the Psalm 69. Great record. And so back then I would get a CD of someone when you'd hear of them, but I was also interested in back catalogs if they already had something. Like, I'd at least want to get one record. So I remember I ordered The Land of Honey, the 1988 Ministry record, and that was where I was just obviously industrial, not as much guitar, still a little bit of heavy edge, but just great industrial. And it's like, wow. Then you kind of get to see, I might not notice it back then, but now it's like, wow, Trent was pretty influenced by Al, obviously, like a lot of these guys. But another great band with I think the best back catalog is KMFDM. So you can go a lot of ways with KMFDM, and that's part of the great thing about this genre, is that there's a lot of changes, and you're not nailed down to one specific region, one genre. KMFDM, their back catalog is amazing, the first 4 records, but now when they got heavy, it's also amazing, and then after a while, obviously, as a lot of people say, at one point they got to be, you're just redoing the same thing, but they've always kept a good humor about it, and they'll say KMFDM in the lyrics, like, KMFDM, do it again, they'll use that one just to like break balls, and they'll use old song names as lyrics for songs. It's great, actually, when you think about it. And another band that's kind of on the lighter, they have some humor to them, although real dark elements as well, as My Life with the Thrill Kill Kult. That's it. Oh, you know what? This makes me think here, because I was about to say, with these bands, none of them are really afraid to put out EPs in between, remix CDs. A lot of their singles will have extra songs and a bunch of remixes. There's no lack of material with these bands, which is great. And how I tie that in is, all right, these also, they do a lot of soundtrack work. So people would hear of My Life with a Thrill Kill Kult through the soundtrack. And I passed on My Life with Thrill Kill Kult back in the day just because there's so many bands. I always wanted to get a record of them, same with KMFDM. I never got fully involved in their catalogs until the YouTube era. That's what's great about putting these band names out here. So the band I forgot that I probably would put, if we're going to leave off Front 242 or Frontline Assembly, a great band, and they do have a decent 90s catalog, although they disbanded, is Machines of Loving Grace. Really one of the best industrial bands ever, and underrated. And they were one of these ones that you could put them with like almost a Manson or Stabbing Westward in the way of they're a real band as well, which is like they'll have a lot of instruments on there as well as the samples and synth. And man, they did it really good. So this isn't a list more about a top 5. It's more to tell you about a history and some of these just pinpoints in music where it's funny how Trent blowing up, a lot of people think, oh geez, it wasn't at all Trent. You know, he was another product in there. You could see where, all right, Downward Spiral is his masterpiece, and it is a great record. Musically, the sound and the technology he was using was probably peak there. That's why I think when that record hit, it was just a little bit different than what Ministry was doing, you know. You found that twist just enough to get in there and grab America by the balls for a quick second, by their metal balls, right? And with things like that, the YouTube going back, I never realized that his Quake albums, you know, when you hear that back in the day, you're like, oh, he did the Quake album, and you're like, ah, geez, what's some 8-bit, you know? And I never realized how these are kind of, you could say lost 9 Inch Nails records because they have elements of it, you know, although it's not, it's more of a rock version, but it also has a little bit of that heaviness that you're like, you wanted Trent to go with. His time between the Downward Spiral and Fragile is where I lost some of the wonder of, you know, when the Fragile came out, it was great, and I remember hearing it in my buddy's system. And I had 2 buddies that had it, so I didn't really get it at the time, but, you know, hearing it in like a bass system in a car, that had a lot of high points. There was nothing wrong with that record. It was pretty good. It was just kind of like, you know, high school had wrapped up, and it was like, you know, it just a long gap in between. So I think he lost a little bit of oomph from some of the older crowd that were like, you know, you get to be like Tool. Once you're waiting 5 years for a CD, it's like, you know, this could go. You're gonna have to really sell it, you know. And but those Quake albums pretty good. You know what I mean? If what you were looking for from him was to come out with something next level, for him to combine what he was doing with Broken and Downward Spiral and just progress. Yeah, the Quakes 1 and 2, I've been hearing parts of them and seems to satisfy that, although I haven't heard the whole thing yet. So what I was saying is that these musical bands, that they're more of, you know, like Stabbing Westward, tons of elements of synth, but you look at them and it's like they could later on go more to be a band. Filter's another one that was like, okay, industrial, but it's really just a band and it's a cool sound. Then they just keep getting more rock as they go. I wouldn't say Stabbing Westward totally lost their elements. I don't know, their last record was just really more of, they're just more geared, and it's smart too because they're more geared for playing live than like, you know, Reznor and certain guys, they got to make adaptations somewhat. It's just really weird about when you hear that Al Jurgensen used no computers to make The Land of Honey. It's just kind of mind-blowing. They were just using some kind of analog recording. I don't know what the hell they were doing, man. It's crazy. So let's get to the Thrill Kill Kult, because that's if I were to pick between a number one, is you almost want to go Ministry, but I always lean towards My Life of Thrill Kill Kult and KMFDM. Especially because of KMFDM's back catalog. If you could get into the first 4, 5 records of KMFDM, you're probably still going to love whatever they did afterward, their heavy era, but man, that stuff is just, it's great, man. Some of the best variety, just dancey, kind of dark at times. That's wild stuff, the KMFDM's early from 84 up until about 90. And there's nothing, you know, it's not like they changed. They just got more angst and more heavy. Nothing wrong with that at all. I'm just looking over these, seeing if I missed any. Frontline Assembly, I listen to a lot of them. They're kind of like the front 242 in a way. And if you look at these bands I'm mentioning, they all coincide with Wax Track records. A lot of them do. Not Filter, not Stabbing Westward. Some of these ones that kind of break off bands. But the main ones are all at some time crossing over, met each other, influenced by each other, using the same technology. You know, that's why when us newer fans to Nine Inch Nails, you know, not that they were always the main industrial band, but they got a nice attention for the genre back then. You know what I mean? It was just a good time. Like, okay, this thing's been around. How about this newer generation? Check it out. And yeah, they had some wild bands just come out of nowhere. You know, and it looks like, oh, they're copying Trent, but it's like, you know, these guys have been around, and some people are just getting shine. There's a guy in Stabbing Westward used to work with Trent, so it's like, you know, and Stabbing Westward is really huge fans of Al. So, you know, Trent will be like, oh, these guys copy me, but it's like, okay, relax, Trent Doug. We love you, but, you know, it's all just studio guys using technology. And so, in '92, when you go back and you look at probably my favorite Nine Inch Nails record is The Broken. You know what I mean? I think that's, in my opinion, that's more of his masterpiece. So he was doing similar stuff to Ministry. You could be like, oh, okay, you know, Ministry went heavy just a little before you guys, and in '92 they definitely did with Psalm 69. So it's like, these guys, in a way, they're whether they realize it or not, they're all in the same, headed for the same goal, headed for the same territory. And that's why, you know, maybe I'll label this as a top 5, but really, this is just a discussion of what guys belong at like a top 10 maybe, or just in the discussion, you know. Filter was cool. I know I just say random stuff out of nowhere. I'm just like, yo, Filter was cool. But that was an interesting little break off. And when you really listen to that record, now even, and back then, you're like, what's so industrial about it is more of the bass tunings and some of the drums. It's hard to explain. They weren't overly synth heavy or anything like that, where you, like, you could say it's like, oh, it's electronic beat music, you know, body music like 242, or you know, some dancey club stuff, disco stuff of the later in my life of the Thrill Kill Kult. You know, it's just it's just another way for these artists to make music, and that's the whole point of the genre, is that you can't nail it down. You know, that's why there's a bunch of bands that are semi-popular that I'm missing, or obscure, that I'm just leaving off of this list, because I just wanted to have a discussion about it and see how it goes. So if you guys are into this, we'll talk about some other more records in depth, you know, because the Thrill Kill Kult and KMFDM and Ministry, Ministry is, you know, they're ashamed of their synth roots of the early 80s, but really, after that first album, when you go to 86 is Twitch, and then Land of Honey in 88, all in that era, and he had a lot of stuff in between, you know, soundtrack stuff, singles, unreleased songs. You can see where Al is just a powerhouse in the studio, somehow, creatively, you know, and he's really good at working with other people, too. He doesn't mind bringing in other guys. It's interesting, because you could have another discussion on looking at linear notes of these guys, and you find out some of these guys have used the same producers along the way, Adrian Sherwood, and, you know, different performers like Chris Verena. He's been in different bands, you know. He pops up in bands that I never even knew about, that my metal buddy tells me about. Like, oh yeah, that blonde dude, man. Wasn't he from Nine Inch Nails? Like, yeah, dude, what's he doing now? Oh, he's fucking jamming with Coldplay. I don't know, he's something like that, you know. Oh, he's with White Zombie on tour. Cool, dude. There was a lot of guys in Trent's camp that were great. Danny Lohner. They had the band Screw in 1992. It's another one you could put up there as a unique metal. And the music labels of the day, they weren't dummies. They knew this stuff was getting popular. So there was, you know, obviously metal versions of the industrial, and a lot of that was around before Trent's initial exposure to the younger kids, I guess you could say, by generation, you know. People that were teens in the 90s. I thought the joint was like almost done when I started, but managed to milk this thing. Cool. Probably the Hashwax in there. Hashwax Records. Thank you guys.